It was the first song the legendary foursome released with their guitar hero playing the keyboard, and the dawning of a new era for one of America's all-time greatest bands, one of my favorites, and the theme song to a legendary prank from my childhood. Stories coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you want the stories behind the great songs straight from the artists, make sure that you subscribe right now and click the bell. That way you never miss out on our daily rock and roll fix. We also have a Patreon. You can take a look at that. There you get more content. You can be listed as a producer on our channel. That helps us keep it a daily channel. And you also look at our newest merch, the Vintage Years collection. That's at professorofrock.com. So to kick off a new decade of rock, Van Halen made a statement in 1980 with their third studio album, Women and Children First. It was the band's first album to feature all original Van Halen material. The nonstop party motif from the self-titled debut and Van Halen 2 were replaced by more serious subject matter. The first single released from Women and Children First was the sociological thriller And the Cradle Will Rock. I mean, as a kid, I was stunned to learn that the sonic boom that launches And the Cradle Will Rock is not one of those original Eddie Van Halen guitar eruptions. It's Eddie all right, but it's Eddie performing on a keyboard rather than a guitar. That produced that explosive opening for And the Cradle Will Rock. I always thought it was a guitar as a kid. The intro was manufactured from a flanger-affected Wurlitzer electric piano, played through Eddie's 1960s model 100-watt Marshall Plexi amplifier, and the result of Eddie's habitual doodling to invent just cool, exotic new sounds. Eddie found he could do a lot more than he originally thought on this Wurlitzer, the same kind of electric piano that the legendary Ray Charles played on his iconic hit, What Did I Say? What I say? All right. Eddie kept banging away on the keys of the Wurlitzer, and he discovered that if he smacked a cluster of keys with his hands hitting no notes in particular, the keyboard seemed to scream out in peril, like a blast of electronic distortion. 2 keys on the piano were busted because Eddie hit him so hard to replicate the effect he stumbled onto just by testing out his new toy. It was after about a 2-month break from touring that the boys went back to Sunset Sound in December of 1979 to start work on Women and Children First. It was at this time that Eddie was really keen on focusing on original material, as he'd composed a few new songs during the break. One of those was the classic Van Halen song, Everybody Wants Some. But everybody wants some! As they were working through tracks for the album, they were a little short, so they went back to some of the earliest songs. Some of these songs went all the way back to early 1974. Songs like Take Your Whiskey Home and In a Simple Rhyme, also the song Fools. A few of these were on the tape that the brothers actually gave to bassist Michael Anthony, as he was just learning the parts when he had just barely joined the band. Now, it was at this point that Eddie pulled out And the Cradle Will Rock. It actually did start out as a riff that Eddie had come up with on the tour bus. But after he'd bought that secondhand Wurlitzer, actually bought it from a pawn shop, it was turned into the keyboard-heavy song. The very first song that Eddie banged out on that Wurlitzer that he bought from the pawn shop was said to be the first iteration of Jump. That's how Eddie has said that in a few interviews. The song, of course, would be Van Halen's biggest hit later in 1984. Spending over a month at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Eddie would say, after we got back from tour, Al and I jammed on the basic riff from And the Cradle Will Rock 2 hours a day for 2 straight weeks. We didn't really know what to do with it, but we were having fun because it sounded so wicked. Then out of nowhere, the chorus came, and to us, it was finished. and Children First was a monumental album for the band. It had a lot of new elements in their sound, but likely the most important guitar innovation on that particular record was neither a technique or a sound, but a piece of hardware that Eddie had been visualizing since he first picked up a guitar. The locking vibrato system. Using a vibrato bar was, of course, a huge element of Eddie's playing technique that was vital to him, bending notes in such a compelling display. But because he did it so much and with so much panache, it would make his guitar go out of tune all the time. He had come up with, some solutions, temporary solutions to make up for this, but none of them really lasted. He had to figure this out. Around this time, another guitarist was experiencing the same thing, Floyd Rose. He was playing in a rock band and wanted to emulate his hero Jimi Hendrix, but his guitar kept going out of tune as well. Now, Floyd had spent many years as a jeweler, apparently, and he'd picked up some really helpful skills. He came up with a process where clamps would lock the strings at the nut right where the neck connects to the headstock, and again at the bridge. Working together, they kept the guitar in tune no matter how excessive the playing as he was experimenting with it. Floyd Rose showed the interlocking system to a friend named Lynn Ellsworth from Boogie Bodies, and he knew it would be perfect for Eddie. Ellsworth's company, Boogie Bodies, they'd come up with the body for the Frankenstein, so he called Eddie to meet up, and he brought Floyd Rose along. Now, after Floyd showed him the system, of course, Eddie really dug it. Eddie gave Floyd a guitar to put one of the mechanisms on, and from there, Eddie helped to perfect it. Eddie said, and I quote, "My role in the design and development of the Floyd was adding the fine tuners to the bridge. Strings stretch, temperatures change, and depending on how hard you play your guitar, it would go out of tune even with the Floyd Rose system. So you'd have to unclamp the nut, which involves loosening 3 screws with an Allen wrench. You have to tune the guitar and reclamp the nut down again. There wasn't enough time to do all that in between playing live, so Eddie came up with a plan to add fine tuners in the bridge. This would allow a guitarist to lock down the strings so that they'd stay in tune. It worked perfectly. This would open up a whole new world for Eddie Van Halen, King Edward. He could now use the whammy bar on the Frankenstein as often as he wanted without worrying that his strings would go sharp or flat. This allowed him to create infinite possibilities with songs, new dimensions of sounds that would continue to raise him above everybody else. As we continue to go through this breakdown of And the Cradle Will Rock, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Zenni has redefined glasses for me. They can do the same for you. Designing your own unique look at Zenni.com. Really fun, really easy. You can search by the shape of your face, by your favorite color, and fascinating styles that enhance your look. And with the ability to add features like blue blocks, which is my favorite, that protect your eyes from digital blue light. They also have anti-fog and anti-glare. It's a game changer. You got to check it out today at Zenni.com. So Eddie Van Halen was notorious for his tinkering, that led to many standout Van Halen tracks. When Eddie got in the zone and began to experiment, he was, as producer Ted Templeman put it, damn serious. Templeman also reminisced on how nervous Eddie was in the studio before they were officially signed by Warner Brothers. Eddie felt the pressure to prove he was, something special. It was Templeman's belief in the band that got Van Halen that record deal. The way that Ted remembers it, he remembers driving down in the pouring rain to watch the guys perform at the Starwood in West Hollywood. That was in '77. After receiving a call from his old friend Marshall Burrell about an unsigned band that he had to see. Even though there were only a few people in the audience that night, Templeman was blown away by the band's just raw energy, as if they were playing in a big arena instead of a small, nearly empty nightclub. And then he convinced Warner Brothers chairman Mo Ostin to go and lock him in. Amazingly, Van Halen had been turned down by just about every label in LA at that point, before Templeman got Ostin to take a chance on the brash young group. When Templeman heard the weird sound that Eddie produced from that Wurlitzer, he yelled out to Eddie, "Wow, what is that?" Eddie responded humbly, nothing. It's just me screwing around. Whenever Eddie was screwing around with a keyboard, it actually made one David Lee Roth very nervous, and he was very vocal about his dismay. He told Eddie many times that nobody wants to see a guitar hero playing a keyboard. But Eddie turned a deaf ear on DLR's commentary. Since the effect on the Wurlitzer sounded so much like a guitar, Dave was okay with it at that point, and the keyboard was used throughout the track, well beyond the intro, actually. And the Cradle Will Rock. Perhaps the most powerful positioning of Eddie's bizarre phase-shifting effect comes in the middle of the track. After the music pauses and DLR delivers his lyrical highlight, "Have you seen Junior's grades?"
Have you seen Junior's grades?
The effect reemerges to lead into EVH's tasty short-lick guitar solo. Just spectacular. During Van Halen's live concert run to support women and children first, called the Invasion Tour, Michael Anthony played the keyboard parts when the band performed in the Cradle Will Rock on stage. The Invasion Tour was also the first Van Halen expedition where they carried multiple truckloads of equipment with them, including a monster sound system and the world's biggest lighting grid at that point. Van Halen concerts became the loudest and most spectacular visual experiences in the business. Years later, when Diamond Dave rejoined Van Halen in the 2000s, Dave changed his famous line to "Have you seen Wolfie's grades?" Of course, referring to Eddie's son Wolfgang, who hitched up with his father's band to play bass after Michael Anthony's unceremonious departure.
Have you seen Wolfie's grades?
The album Women and Children First was another fast and dirty process for Van Halen as they finished recording the album in just 6 days. I mean, these guys were incredible. They could do it in a week or two. But as I said before, the record took on more serious topics at this point, such as society's generational conflict that was the underlining thesis of And the Cradle Will Rock. I mean, DLR's lyrics to the song were not about all-night drinking and cavorting. Instead, the narrative was about the rebellion of the younger generation and the fear it provoked from the older generation, whose responsibility it was to raise their kids according to their values and their ideals for an acceptable lifestyle.
Well, they say it's kind of frightening how this younger generation swings, you know.
There's disconcerting reality to And the Cradle Will Rock when the lyrics tell the story of a teenager withdrawing from parental sheltering, detaching from his family, hanging with a rough crowd with no job, no education.
Who he meets and he's unemployed.
But the cradle will rock, and the kids will rock on. Eddie, Alex, and Mike certainly treated And the Cradle Will Rock as a pivotal track for Van Halen, which it very much is. As I mentioned previously, they rehearsed the music of And the Cradle Will Rock more than 2 hours a day for 2 straight weeks. Eddie also divulged that the chorus for And the Cradle Will Rock came out of nowhere, during one of those jam sessions. In several interviews, Eddie has described the sessions for And the Cradle Will Rock and Women and Children First overall, saying, "It seemed like Women and Children First took longer because we were renegotiating our contract with Warner, but we did most of the instrumental tracks in 4 days except for the acoustic song, Could This Be Magic? We did that at the very end."
Magic, or could this be love?
All the vocal tracks and harmonies were knocked out in 4 days that following week. He would then explain that when he got the Wurlitzer, he brought it with him on the back of the tour bus. And even though he'd already essentially written And the Cradle Will Rock on guitar, he just thought it would sound more epic on the pawn shop instrument. I love that. The term, the Cradle Will Rock, has an interesting provenance. The earliest use of the phrase in printed literature is believed to be in the children's rhyme Hush-a-Bye Baby, found in Mother Goose's Melody circa 1765, actually. It's reprinted in 1785. Now, over time, the rhyme was changed to Rockabye Baby, which is probably where Van Halen came up with the phrase, the Cradle Will Rock, directly from the line that became a popular children's lullaby. Rockabye Baby, on the treetops, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. We all know it by heart. Sure, all of us had our mothers or somebody sing it to us. There's actually a CD series called Rockabye Baby that was included in gift bags given to all the survivors of the 2010 cholera outbreak in Haiti. The series was produced by Diamond Dave's sister, Lisa Roth. Cradle Will Rock is also the title of a controversial 1937 play that was presented in a format that blended agitation and propaganda. Agitprop was live theater with overtly political messages designed to change public opinion and encourage the audience into taking some sort of action to evoke moral or political change. The Cradle Will Rock musical was originally part of the Federal Theater Project. It was directed by film luminaries Orson Welles and John Houseman. The play was controversial because of its pro-labor sentiment at the height of the Great Depression.
I am the Cradle Will Rock.
By the late 70s, cradle was the urban slang for home, which reinforced the cultural relevance of Van Halen's and the Cradle Will Rock. In every family, over all generations, past, present, and future, the winds of change will blow, and the cradle will rock. And I say, rock on. And the Cradle Will Rock was not a crossover hit. The single stalled at number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100. But as an original composition and the first single to showcase Eddie's gift as a multi-instrumentalist, it was a very important track in the evolution of the mighty Van Halen. It's also a song that was the theme to one of my greatest pranks that happened in middle school. I've been waiting a long time to tell this story. So I had a PE teacher that, in order to protect the innocent, I'm going to change his name. We'll call him Mr. Braxton. This guy was extremely militant and morally deflating. I mean, for some reason, he had my number. He didn't like me at all. He's always picking on me. Every chance he got, he made me run laps or sweep the gym floor or drop and give him 50. I couldn't do 10, let alone 50. Well, he used to play music during PE. It was his favorite thing to do. He felt that it would motivate us to play harder or run faster. It didn't. Because the music he played was universally horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like John Denver and I like the Carpenters, but when you're 11 years old, they aren't exactly in your wheelhouse.
Around some kind of lonely cloud.
Mr. Braxton seemed to hate everything. But there was one thing that he hated more than anything in the whole world. Heavy rock music. I mean, he would condemn it at least a few times a week. He'd slip it into his lesson plan. He was also a science teacher. He branded it what many in my community in the 80s called it devil music. Devil music. So one day, I borrowed a boombox from my homeroom, and I stocked it with brand new batteries, and I went up on the stage that was at the end of the gym. And luckily, the curtains were closed, so no one could see what I was doing. I climbed up on this really tall ladder, and I got high up in the rafters. And I set this stereo up on the highest part of those rafters, and I inserted one of my favorite cassettes in the tape deck. Side one of Van Halen's Women and Children First. I turned the volume all the way up to 10, tried to push it to 11. I pushed play, and I scurried down that ladder. I knew I only had about 6 or 7 seconds before that music would blare throughout the gym. And I remember when I got down the ladder, I pushed that ladder over, I pushed it back behind this grimy pit that was behind the stage, and I pushed some wrestling mats on top of it. so that it would be pretty much impossible to find. Out came the most glorious sound in middle school history, Snake River middle school history. The metallic luster of the sensational classic and the Cradle Will Rock. So I sneaked out the side door of the stage and I came into the gym. I joined the rest of the class. I think they were running laps. Yeah, they were running laps around the gym. Mr. Braxton's face went red as a tomato. His blood was boiling. He was frantically shouting, "Where's that music coming from? Turn that off! Turn it off right now!" Everybody was as perplexed as he was. Where was the music coming from? It took about 60 seconds or more of just chaos and utter confusion as David Lee Roth and one Eddie Van Halen completely drowned out John Denver's "Thank God I'm a Country Boy."
So I fiddle when I can and I work when I should. Thank God I'm a country boy.
Mr. Braxton figured out the sound was coming from high above the stage. And, he was looking for that ladder, but he couldn't find it. He grew just more agitated by the second. As Diamond Dave sang the chorus and the Cradle Will Rock. I swear, I just stood there and basked in the beauty of that moment. The mighty Van Halen was absolutely pummeling one of the meanest, most shallow middle school teachers in history. He was beside himself, shouting his frustrations to anybody who'd listen, which was really nobody. "This is noise pollution. This music will corrupt your mind. This is satanic. Shut it off now." I mean, he got so angry. He didn't know what to do. He started picking up basketballs and throwing them up, trying to knock the stereo down, and it just wasn't strong enough to get the basketball up there. It was futile. Nothing that he could do. It was a triumph of the ages for me. Everyone in the class was just laughing their heads off. It was like that scene, my version of that scene from the Shawshank Redemption, where Andy Dufresne has locked everyone out of the warden's office and he's playing that opera record throughout the prison.
Truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are best left unsaid.
It was the greatest feeling ever. It was then that I really knew what freedom felt like. Needless to say, class was dismissed early, and he didn't get that stereo down until it had played both sides of Van Halen's Women and Children First, even a little bit of side one again. Luckily, it was one of those tape decks that switched back and forth when that side was finished. Now, I lost my copy of the album that day until I bought another one probably a few months later, but it was well worth it. A Hall of Fame moment from my youth. God bless you, Eddie Van Halen. Leave us a comment about this amazing song and the mighty Van Halen. What are your memories of Van Halen's third album? Share some of your stories of this Hall of Fame band. If you like this video, we do invite you to be a full-time part of our channel by subscribing below right now. Check us out on Patreon for even more content. And make sure to check out our Vintage Years collection at professorofrock.com. Help us keep the music alive. That's the goal. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friend.